want to welcome everyone to the first Honesty Lunch and Learn of 2024. We have a pretty heavy topic, but so important, especially coming off of some pretty harmful issues and policies that are floating around in the Ohio State House right now. This is addressing political violence and how we can all collectively protect honest education in a high-functioning multiracial democracy here in Ohio and across the U.S. We are being joined by Over Zero. So you can see that we have a pretty hearty conversation. We're also being joined by our very own Sheena Barnes and Nick Zingarelli, who is a very active ally, activist, and parent protecting trans rights across the state of Ohio. My name is Cynthia Peoples, she, her pronouns. I'm the founding director of Honesty for Ohio Education. For those of you that are new to the space, Honesty is a nonpartisan statewide coalition that's made up of nearly 70 different organizational partners and diverse stakeholders and thousands of students, families, educators, and community members who all believe that every student deserves an honest, high-quality education grounded in truth, facts, and diverse perspectives. If you look over to the right of the screen, you can see just a handful of those incredible partners that we work shoulder to shoulder with every single day to protect honest education across Ohio. And we do that by educating, advocating, and building community around honest education, affirming all identities, cultures, and lived experiences in the classroom, and most importantly, protecting the rights and safety of all students, of all families, and our hardworking educators and school board members, Sheena Barnes, across the state of Ohio. And we do this very important work at 3 critical access points to public education. That's at the State House, at the State Board of Education, and in our local schools including K-12 and our higher ed spaces. And we do that by putting out very important up-to-the-minute news, information, events just like this one, and programs, and teaching people how to organize in their own communities to protect honest education and to protect our students and our families. Today, like I said, you're joining us for a deep program around addressing political violence to protect honest education. Before we get into that topic, though, we just want to give you a quick update around the state of education here in Ohio. We'll swing into that presentation by Samantha Owens from Over Zero. And then Sam Shim is going to lead us in a pretty hearty roundtable discussion with Sheena, with Nick, and with Sam. And then we'll wrap up with some different ways that you can plug into this important topic and some upcoming events in the State House and at the State Board of Education. But first, let's swing over to the State House, Capitol Square, excuse me, and just give you a quick update on what's going on. Before we do that, though, we always like to center this conversation in what our Ohio legislators, the State Board, and the new Department of Education and Workforce should be focusing on. What you're looking at here right now is the Ohio Department of Education Strategic Plan for Education 5-year plan that kicked off in 2019, and that is going to wrap up this year. And if you look at the heart of the strategic plan, you see that all of these priorities are centered around a whole child approach to education, which is so important. And if you're not familiar with what a whole child approach to education is, it centers the child and it educates the entire child. They don't just look at them as an academic machine. They look at the whole totality of the child. How does the child learn? What does the child's home environment look like? What does social emotional look like in practice in a classroom? What do their food needs and nutrition needs look like? But this is how Ohio envisions that educators and school board members and administrators should be serving all of Ohio children. Unfortunately, this is what so many of us are grappling with instead of that whole child approach to education. This is a nationally coordinated, a nationally funded extremist agenda that has been imported into the state of Ohio in those 3 lanes of education that I mentioned earlier. The goals of this extremist agenda is to disrupt, dismantle and essentially defund high quality public education, and to create a flight out of public education into privatized education and really distract from the real education issues that are facing our students, our households, and our community. They're doing that by weaponizing race, weaponizing identity, weaponizing how and who we love, and weaponizing faith, specifically weaponizing Christianity. They're villainizing educators, administrators, our hardworking elected school board members, all to cast this chilling effect on education and to drive families out of public education. If you look over to the right, this is what keeps all of us up at night. This is a lot of the pending legislation that we're dealing with. There is so much of this harmful legislation that we had to break it up topically. And if you look over, you can see that we have about 5 of these bills that are highlighted right now. And these are some of the bills that I just quickly want to give you an update on right now. So the big bill that we're all hyper focused on right now is House Bill 68. House Bill 68 is a bill that bans gender affirming care for minors, and it also bans trans females, trans girls, trans women from being able to participate on school sports teams, that's K-12 and higher ed, that align with their gender identity. What we know right now is that the House has just scheduled a House session to vote on a measure that would override Governor DeWine's recent veto of House Bill 68. That session is scheduled for Wednesday, January 10th at 2 p.m. Governor DeWine recently banned House Bill 68 over the holiday break on December 29th, and this was about 2 weeks after the House and Senate both passed House Bill 68 on December 13th. Another up-to-the-minute update that we can provide about this veto is Governor DeWine just held a press conference that kicked off at 10:30, where he was giving an update on how he is continuing to double down on why he vetoed House Bill 68. His top line message is that students, their families, and trained medical experts are the ones who should be making decisions about the health care and gender affirming care for that student, not politicians. Governor DeWine doubled down on that today, and he also offered some updates, and I'll quickly run into those updates. 2 of them is that he drafted some administrative rules that will be open for public comment today. One of those administrative rules is that Ohio must provide a multidisciplinary team to support adults and minors who are accessing gender affirming care. And he was very clear and explicit about that some of that care must include deep and comprehensive mental health services and support. He also said that Ohio, the Department of Health, must report de-identifying, meaning anonymous information about who is accessing gender affirming care, the diagnosis, and the treatment. He says that this aggregate data is very important to understand the life-saving aspects of gender affirming care, and that it will be very helpful for the providers and for the families to be able to access this anonymous information. And he also said that he signed an executive order just this morning that bans gender affirming surgery for minors. And we'll have a lot more information about this in the coming hours. We literally just came off of this press conference. So that's what I can tell you about House Bill 68. We do have some ways that you can take action to help this veto of House Bill 68 stick, and make sure that the House members do not cast enough votes. They need 59 votes to override Governor DeWine's veto on Wednesday. Another update we can tell you about House Bill 183, which is another attack on our transgender community in Ohio, is that there is going to be a hearing for a new sub-bill also on Wednesday, which we've dubbed as Bash on Trans Kids Day here in Ohio. On Wednesday, January 10th at 9 a.m., the House Higher Ed Committee, the sponsor of House Bill 183, will be offering that sub-bill. House Bill 183 is a bill that bans trans individuals from school restrooms and school facilities that align with their gender identity. Swinging over to the right, we just want to give you some updates on some things that happened since our last Lunch and Learn. House Bill 8, which is a bill that essentially proliferates don't say trans, don't say gay censorship in Ohio classrooms and require school districts out trans students. There was an all testimony hearing back on December 12th in the Senate Education Committee. There were twice the Senate Ed Committee tried to schedule votes to move that bill out of committee, and twice the Senate Ed Committee canceled those committee votes. So we're really grateful about that. Also, Senate Bill 83, which is a sweeping higher education bill. We dub it the Higher Education Destruction Act, which bans DEI, race and gender-based programs and policies. And it has a lot of harmful language around retrenchment for Ohio faculty. That bill ended up passing out of the House Higher Education Committee by an 8-7 vote on December 6th. So we are trying to hold that back from a full House vote. So we have some ways that you can take action around that bill on our landing pages as well. And Sam will continue to drop links into the chat about how you can access the different ways to take actions around these bills. And then finally, House Bill 171, which is a bill that we have been championing. It's a bill that we helped to get a sponsor for and worked closely. There's a small coalition that helped bring this bill to life. It's a multicultural curriculum bill that revises K-12 social studies curricula to reflect all of the diverse communities, contributions, and cultures across the state of Ohio. There was a proponent testimony hearing for this bill, of which frustratingly only 3 witnesses were invited to offer proponent testimony. That was back on December 12th in the House Primary and Secondary Education Committee, and we are calling for a full proponent hearing for this bill. Again, you can head over to our landing pages. You can head over to our legislation tracker page to get deeper information, more information about all of these bills and ways that you can take action. Specifically for the House Bill 68, this measure to override Governor DeWine's veto, there are 2 specific things that we're asking folks to do to stop this override of DeWine's veto. First, contact House Speaker Jason Stevens, urging him to stop the veto override vote. He has the power to stop this vote from happening on Wednesday, January 10th. There's 2 ways you can do that. Call him on this phone line. If his voicemail is full, continue to call. His aides do check the voicemail. Once they check the voicemail, they empty the box. Please call Speaker Stevens, and then also go a step further and email Speaker Stevens. His email is there. And then secondly, contact your own House rep. Urge them to reject House Bill 68, and if the session does happen, please urge them to vote no on that veto override on January 10th. And Sam's also going to drop a link into the chat how you can find your legislator on the Ohio State Legislature page. And then finally, State Board of Education and Department of Education and Workforce. State Board of Ed is going to have their monthly meeting next week on January 8th. The meeting will start at 10 a.m. One of the big things that they're going to do at the start of the meeting is welcome our new state superintendent, who is Paul Kraft, who was the former Buckeye Valley Local Schools superintendent. They will also run through the Ohio Assessment for Educators annual data review. They have a few other bullets on their agenda, which you can find on their website, which Sam will drop into the chat also. And then a week later, the Department of Education and Workforce, DO for short, is going to be holding their next bi-monthly meeting. That will be on Thursday, January 18th, and that starts at 8 o'clock. Both of these meetings will be live streamed on the Ohio channel. You can head over there. You can watch archived, previously held meetings as well as live meetings. And a quick reminder that Stephen Dakin was recently tapped, and the Senate did confirm him as the new director for the Department of Education and Workforce. Okay, well, those are all of my my updates for the State House. Please continue to follow all of these updates. You can follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter. That's the easiest way to get that information straight into your inbox. But now I want to go ahead and turn it over to our featured guest, Samantha Owens. She, her pronouns. She is the director of programs for Over Zero. For over a decade, Samantha has been focused on leveraging strategic communication for violence prevention and social change. We love that. Since joining Over Zero in 2018, she has led the organization's national programming and spearheaded the development of numerous organizational resources, including countering dangerous narratives in the time of COVID-19 and building a resiliency network, a toolkit for building community resilience during a contentious election cycle. Boy, do we know all about that here in Ohio. She holds a bachelor's in religious studies and international studies from Northwestern University and a master's in human rights from the University College London. We are in such good company, and we are so happy to welcome you. Samantha, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am really grateful to be here. Really grateful for everyone who's joined today for this important work. Today, I will be discussing the role of political violence in shaping public life, or the detrimental effects to public life. Looking at the ripple effects of political violence, and then what actions we can take to counteract political violence. Just a quick note that I want to start with is this presentation will not be focused on immediate de-escalation. It will not be focused on security measures. It will not be focused on legislation. All of these are incredibly important elements when thinking about how to counteract political violence and how to keep people safe amidst rising political violence. But I really want to be clear that the focus here is understanding the dynamics and how political violence has a ripple effect, and then broadly how we can mitigate both the underlying risk factors and start to prevent some of those ripple effects. So if we go to the next slide, what is political violence? We see headlines about political violence, increasing. We see headline after headline about violence targeting, local officials, targeting different activists, civil society. We at Over Zero define political violence as violence aimed at political ends. So knowing that access to public life is inherently political, we define it as controlling or benefiting or changing who benefits from and participates fully in political, economic, and sociocultural life. What I really want to make clear is that we do not differentiate between political violence and identity-based violence or hate violence. Knowing that particularly in this country, the Venn diagram is basically a circle, and that groups who have been historically marginalized, targeted, are more likely to be targeted with this type of violence. It's really important to note that the goal of the violence is really what makes the goal, and the impact of the violence is really what we're focused on. And because we're defining this violence as violence that is attempting to control who has access to and who benefits from these different aspects of public life, we include harassment, threats, intimidation, and violence in our definition. So it's anything that creates this atmosphere of violence and removes feelings of safety. If we click to tactics that pave the way, what we see as inextricably linked with physical violence, threats, again, things that remove this feeling of safety from participating in public life, we see a number of tactics used to really pave the way and also accompany this type of violence. And these tactics are used to both prompt more widespread violence, to make violence seem more acceptable, more mainstream, and to create these zero-sum mentalities between groups that really make violence feel more acceptable for broader swaths of the population. The first thing that we see is really fomenting fear. We see, different pundits, violent groups, authoritarian actors, anti-democratic actors, really upping the sort of emotion and the sense of threat. And this is to make people afraid. Once people are primed for fear, once you're in that fearful place, it puts you on the alert. It puts people on the alert, and creates this zero-sum mentality where safety is on the line. So we see a lot of fear directed toward targeted groups, and that is used to get broader support. This is what we see with scapegoating. A lot of the LGBTQIA scapegoating that we see right now is based in this sense of fear. We've seen it, we see it among targeted groups. We see it with xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Black discrimination. Also, we see sowing tensions as a tactic that paves the way. Again, removing any sense of sort of shared struggle or shared goals, the idea that, no longer is my future and my well-being tied up in your future or your well-being, but the two are actually in opposition to each other. These are messages that we really see kind of laying the foundation for political violence. And then we also see the spread of mis and disinformation. So mis and disinformation is a key tactic of violent actors, people who are really aimed at, people who are really trying to use violence to control access to public life. You need mis and disinformation. You need untruths in order to scapegoat groups of people. You need to create a sense of chaos. You need to create uncertainty in order to gain control and to really mainstream, again, those zero-sum understandings of public life. So if we go to the next slide, when we're looking at political violence, when we're looking at threats, harassment, intimidation, physical violence, it's important to understand that beyond its immediate impact, which harm to targeted individuals, it also has a chilling effect on society. Cynthia mentioned the chilling effect on education, and this is, if we think about a democratic society generally, the use of violence to control who has access to it ultimately has that sort of ripple effect. And we can think more about what that ripple effect looks like, both in the medium term and the long term. So if we go to the next slide, the first sort of ripple effect is that it changes who feels safe participating in public life. So again, beyond the immediate impacts of the people targeted, the immediate harms caused by the violence, it also sends a message. Violence sends a message. It says, if you're like this person, if you're like that person, if you have this identity, you are not safe participating in public life. So violence in that way, it's an action. It has immediate consequences, but it's also norm setting. It sets a norm. It sets an expectation for who is safe participating in public life. If we go to the next, it then by removing feelings of safety for people being targeted or identity groups being targeted, it can decrease public participation in democracy, again, particularly among targeted groups. we go to the next, therefore it can change key institutions. If people don't feel safe running for office, if people don't feel safe voting, if people don't feel safe participating in civic life, it allows people who are associated with violent actors and associated with authoritarian groups to really consolidate power within key institutions. And therefore, key institutions can become anti-democratic in their nature and their practice once the people in power are associated with those violent groups. It also, thinking about the society-wide impacts, it justifies and normalizes violence as protection and revenge. Once we see the use of violence, what that does is it can create cycles of violence. So targeted groups may respond with violence, and then violent actors, anti-democratic actors, sort of up the ante on the violence and use their own violence and cycles of violence that they have created to justify further violence. So it is this, it's sort of an engineering of this cycle of violence that is used to further normalize violence, to then further target, targeted groups, and to further consolidate power. When it's violence coming from the state, it is also used to normalize crackdowns, power consolidation, state violence. It is used to justify violence against citizens by the state if we're seeing political violence coming from the state. When we see violence coming from violent groups, such as militias or other sort of white nationalist groups, anti-government groups, what this type of violence does is it bolsters their fame and increases recruitment. A lot of violent groups use violence, harassment, and intimidation as basically part of their PR strategy. It's to get their name and ideology floating around in the news cycle. And even as their ideologies are being denounced, their fame, their sense of power increases because people are talking about them and the violence that they have committed. So if we go to the next slide, when we think about these ripple effects and the detrimental effect of political violence on society, we therefore must address the violence in the immediate term. And that's what I was talking about in terms of security, de-escalation. But we must also address its impact and the narratives that make it more likely to occur. And that's what I will briefly discuss. How we can turn down the temperature, how we can build a broader we, and how we can set positive norms to influence the overall sort of communication environment to ensure that that violence does not become normalized, and to try to counteract this chilling effect. So what are some strategies? I just named them. So first and foremost, we want to turn down the temperature when political violence is increasing. And again, that includes threats, harassment, intimidation. How do we turn down the temperature? How do we not take the bait? And how do we ensure that the way these violent events are being discussed do not lay the groundwork for further chilling and intimidation? So if we go to the next slide, the first is we want to deny extremist and violent groups free publicity. So when we discuss intimidation, we do a lot of trainings for journalists. We talk about, not naming the group, not discussing, not giving the ins and outs of their ideology, not making them seem bigger and more powerful than they are. Sometimes, or at least being mindful of naming them. It's important to discuss, the role that things like, authoritarianism and white supremacy play. But knowing a lot of the tactics of extremist groups and the fact that they're using violence as a means of free PR, at least thinking about that and considering, am I taking the bait right now when I'm talking about this extremist group or talking about this violent group or talking about this bigoted actor? Am I taking the bait and helping them get their name in the headlines, and just being cognizant of that? So if we go to the next point, keeping people informed. So keeping people in the loop with, what's happening in terms of, response. What is the community doing? What are we doing to ensure safety? Keeping people informed every step of the way during our response, both in terms of civil society response, government's response, local government response. Consistent, accurate information can really help turn down the temperature of a lot of the mis and disinformation and increased fear that can happen in the wake of a lot of acts of violence, threats, harassment, intimidation. We go to the next slide. Being specific. We see a lot of headlines or a lot of public statements that say, a violent group flooded the streets, or a school was bombarded. What we want to do is be specific so people really have a sense of what happened. We don't want to be hyperbolic with language, because that can feed into that chilling effect. So if six members of a violent group show up at a school, saying 6 members associated with, a known white supremacist group showed up at the school, this is the response that's happening. But really specifics, specific numbers, specific times, specific locations can be really helpful in making people not feel overwhelmed and reaffirming a sense of agency and control over people's own actions that can mitigate this sort of chilling effect. Next, again, reaffirming agency and fostering positive collective action. Highlighting the ways people have responded, highlighting the ways, school board members have responded, highlighting the ways, people are keeping each other safe, people are de-escalating, highlighting actions taken, in response, or continued proactive action taken by people targeted or the broader community to ensure equity in access to public life is very important. We go to the next one. Finally, it's making the community the main character of the story. For so many violent actors, both in government and outside of government, the desire is for the violence and to be the main character of the story, because that is what has the chilling effect. That is what ultimately can have these detrimental effects on society. So making the community the main character of the story, the people impacted, the people who, stand in solidarity with the people impacted, really making it a story about the community rather than a story about the violence, can really, again, keep the focus on, true community-based action and governance, rather than seed ground to violent actors who are hoping to send a message via violence. So if we go to the next slide, we also want to build a broader we. What does this mean? So if we think back to tactics that paved the way, a lot of this is based in zero-sum mentalities. It goes from us and them to us versus them to us or them. So a way to disrupt that is to build broader identities that can undercut some of these zero-sum narratives. So the first is to appeal to overarching identities. So identities such as parents, people who care about education, Ohioans, Akronites, like things. Local geographic identities can be really, really powerful because, the roads you drive on, where you shop, the school your children go to, those are things that really matter on the day to day. So appealing to those different overarching identities. And appealing to cross-cutting identities. So these can be identities that you can say, listen, you might be a Democrat, you might be a Republican, but we are all, we are people who care about local infrastructure, say. We are people who care about local green spaces. We are people who care about a local environment. So this is more about, acknowledging sort of the different camps that people sit in, but finding areas of connection to again, sort of muddy the water of these strict us versus them identities. And then where overarching and cross-cutting identities don't exist, building new identities based on things that matter to people. It seems like this group is a great example of that. People who care about honest education. So thinking about, really leaning into leaning into this brand as people who care about honest education, and locally, if there, are new sort of groups you can form to again sort of muddy the us versus them waters. And then tying identities to values. A lot of place-based identities or identities around, say, parenthood and family, tying the different identities to values. We value, freedom. For us, freedom means the freedom to learn the truth and hear multiple perspectives. It means the freedom to, make decisions for our families. It's tying identities to values and then defining what those values mean. So using shared values and then saying, to us, this is what these values mean, but really making it centered in who we are, what identities we share, what those values mean, and then using that to give a platform to expected actions and norms. So if we go to the final slide, setting positive norms is very important. So norms are, what we think most, well, there's different types of norms, but it's basically what we think most people in our group are doing, and therefore what we think we should be doing. And research shows more and more that norms, more than anything else, shape behavior. What we think most people are doing is what shapes our behavior most, according again to behavioral science. So proactively setting positive norms, not just waiting until there is a trigger event. So saying, in this community, we are in Dayton, we believe in community. To us, that means, protecting one another while we all, make the best decisions for our families. And then, showcasing a story of someone who maybe changed their mind, or an unlikely group of people coming together to protect, trans children in a school. It is showing those positive norms, showing people from a group doing something proactively and not just responding and saying, no, we don't do that. No, we don't believe in that. It's showcasing and setting a norm ahead of time. And that also, it creates the sense of social expectation before a trigger event. Engaging norm reference. This is just, thinking critically about who people look to, whether that's a local radio DJ, whether that is, someone who hands out the coffee at church, whether that is, a local coach. It's thinking creatively about who people look to decide what's normal, what's expected, and working with them to set positive norms. And then reaffirming norms in the face of trigger events. So referring back to some of those stories you shared proactively. And it's also not saying, it's framing things positively. In Dayton, we believe that, families have the right to make their own decisions. In Dayton, we believe in honest education, rather than only saying, we don't believe in XYZ, or we reject violence. Those are important, but it's important not to always be on the defensive. Correcting norm misperceptions, this is a huge one, and they've done a lot of studies around this, particularly in terms of substance abuse on college campuses. That's where a lot of this research comes from. Studies have shown time and time again that if you correct norm misperceptions, so you say, you may think all of your peers, you may think a majority of people support violence, you may think a majority of people support discrimination against LGBTQ youth. The fact is, most people support a diversity and equity in schools. The fact is, most people in our community want an honest education. If you're able to use numbers, if you're able to use statistics, great. But just saying most people still support this. Most people still want a representative democracy. That can go a long way in terms of correcting the misperceptions. And then finally, ensuring that we don't signal a negative norm. It can be really frustrating in the face of rising threats, in the face of, ongoing, legislative challenges, challenges from violent groups, not to get sucked into saying things like hate is everywhere, violence is rising everywhere, more and more people are committing violence. Unfortunately, what we know is that can further normalize violence. It can increase the chilling effect, and it can also embolden people who may be bigoted or hateful or support violence, and create this new norm that ultimately feeds into the chilling effect that violent groups want to have. So rather than saying violence is everywhere, saying something like a small group of people are trying to use violence to shape our society. We in I'm going to keep using Dayton. We in Dayton reject that. In Dayton, we believe that everyone should have access to public life. So this was really like kind of a very quick whistle-stop tour of the dynamics of political violence and its potential chilling effect, and also some key things to keep in mind when thinking about not taking the bait in order to feed into that chilling effect. So I want to hand it back to Honesty for Ohio Ed, back to Sam, and looking forward to the rest of this conversation.
Samantha, thank you so much. That was so helpful. I recognized a lot of our own messaging framework and a lot of the great tips you offered about how we talk about violence without actually naming some of those actors and giving them free real estate in our own heads and free real estate in the public domain. So thank you for all of those great tips. I want to go ahead and turn it over to Sam Shim now. Sam is the first Asian American to be elected into public office in Columbus and served on the Worthington City School Board of Education for about 8 years as a Korean American father, raising autistic, multiracial, and transgender children. He has been a long-standing public education activist championing safe, equitable, inclusive school policies. I'm so happy to turn the comms over to Sam to lead this roundtable discussion with Sam, Nick, and Sheena. Go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Sam, for the great presentation, and thank you, Cynthia, for the warm introduction. So in the interest of time, I want to quickly introduce our two wonderful panelists. First, we have Sheena Barnes. We all know Sheena, who made history by being the first woman of color who identifies as LGBTQ to win a seat on the on the Toledo Public Schools Board of Education. They serve as a liaison for the Toledo chapter Students Demand Action, a youth-led national organization that advocates for common sense gun laws and work to end gun violence. And also, they currently sit on numerous other boards, such as the Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center, Scouts of America, also known as Boy Scouts of America for Erie Shores Council, the National Black Justice Coalition, Local Progress, Black Caucus, and the Buckeye Flame. Sheena is also a core member of our Honesty for Ohio Education team. We also have today Nick Zingarelli. Nick is a proud father of their transgender daughter and has been fighting for basic human rights since she came out in December 2020. Professionally, Nick is the director and chief attorney of the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts Help Center, where they assist unrepresented litigants with matters in the municipal court. Nick is a member of the Equality Ohio Legal Clinic Committee, a regular volunteer with the Name Gender Marker Change Clinic, and serves as secretary of the Cincinnati Bar Association Grievance Committee. Nick is a 2001 graduate of the University of Cincinnati College of Arts and Science and a 2005 graduate of the College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. I wanted to give them a warm welcome to them, and we appreciate you guys joining us today. The presentation was wonderful. So I wanted to first ask Sheena and Nick, from your own personal experience as Ohioans, have you or your family been a target of political violence?
I've been a target of more of a silent political violence. I think we're very careful now with the very holding accountable community that we starting to have, especially on TikTok and things like that, so people don't want to get canceled. So it's settled. It's like, I'm gonna send you a letter and not talk about your Blackness or your queerness, but just mention like the 1913 project, or mention, we don't will come by the house and just stare at my house. I have not had directly impact like some of my fellow board members across Ohio, but I have more of the quiet experiences that most groups that are marginalized because of racism and oppression has experienced.
Yeah, so I haven't experienced anything that would be, I guess I should say, in your face, but I've been very active in media and bringing awareness, especially to House Bill 68. And I had an article that was published in the Ohio Capitol Journal that got picked up by a lot of media outlets, including WCPO, which is the Cincinnati ABC affiliate. And on social media, my wife read the comments that were then associated with that article, and I was called a groomer, a child abuser, a pedophile. I was told that I should be locked up. So basically internet trolls that would like to say some terrible, hurtful things. And that doesn't sound, it's like, well, don't read the comments. That's the takeaway. It's like, well, yeah. But you still then become very aware that this is out there. And I think you're already aware that it's out there when you move into this public space of advocacy, but it becomes very real when you see it in the printed word. And it becomes scary because you then think these are real people that at least are voicing that they would like to see something negative happen to me, or that have this terrible belief about who I am as a human being because I want to stand up for my daughter's rights. That's scary, especially when you do see hateful organizations marching at places where people are just trying to gather to show their identity and to show their pride. You think, is one of the people that's posted one of these comments a member of one of these hate-based organizations? And it makes you recede sometimes out of concern for personal and family safety. And I think that's a natural reaction.
I'm so sorry that both of you had to experience this. You know, Ohio is home for all of us, for all residents, and really hate and you know, discrimination really has no place in our state. But it's really sad that it does. Oh, you know, Samantha, I think you were gonna chime in.
Yeah, I wanted to first echo that I so sorry that Sheena and Nick that you've had those experiences. And I think you know, when thinking about the chilling effect and sort of expanding the lens of what we consider political violence, I think I think we can really think about speech as part of it. And in particular, I'm thinking about the lens of dangerous speech rather than hate speech. So dangerous speech is sometimes more coded or may not be sort of as hateful or vitriolic on its surface. But the word groomer is definitely something that is dangerous, and because it implies the need for protection against this person, right? The idea, the clear implication is that if someone is a groomer, we need to protect our children against them. We need to make sure that they are therefore not able to groom. And that is something that we see in patterns of dangerous speech, which is that, you know, it may not be it may not be a direct call for violence, but there is a clear implication because someone is posing some sort of existential threat. And this sort of language around grooming is you know, is symptomatic of that, and is a broader part of you know, the authoritarian playbook of painting LGBTQIA folks or people who are allied with them as some sort of existential threat.
Sorry,
you.
I have a 2-year-old with me, so my bad.
We have a question from an attendee. So let me ask the question. It's in our Q&A. And Samantha and Nick and Sheena, if you want to chime in, feel free. The question is, I feel scared to go to an event because of the chilling effect you described. Are there ways to counteract that internal fear, techniques to keep in public life when scared? Any quick thoughts you would like to share?
Yes, I also go through this daily with just having anxiety and trauma from growing up in a very high gun violence area. I'm from Flint, Michigan, born and raised in Flintstone. But those things do impact you. And I think the first things to do is start talking about it. Start sharing with people that you feel are trustworthy with those vulnerable moments in your circle and say, hey, I really want to go to this event. I feel scared. Also, it's okay to do a very basic safety plan because we have to live in that reality right now with the rise of gun violence as well. To do a quick safety plan in your head, like, okay, these are the people I'm going to call for emergency. These are the exits, but you don't want to live in fear because that's what they want. So it's kind of a very, very tricky dance. You want to be prepared, but you don't want to be over burdened with fear because then they'll win. They'll know that if they make things so uncomfortable for you, you won't show up, you won't speak out, and you won't stand up against what they're trying to do, which is continue to push hate. So first, definitely start talking to people about it. You know, and I always push to promote the qualities of taking care of your mental health. Talking to a professional mental health specialist is nothing wrong with that. It's a lot of crap that we have to deal with. But also talking to other folks about this is why I feel this way, and seeing what's the outcome for those. But definitely take time, breathe, and take up space, and still go if you can.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's safety in numbers. So creating community that you can then attend events like this with, it's very unlikely that you would be alone at a place like this. So finding allies to then be together with creates its own safety plan. And I always look at it as the metaphor. Not everybody stops to look at the beauty of the wildflowers, but everybody will stop for a car crash. And what I mean by that is that, when hate groups say we're going to be here and we're going to raise a fuss and everything else, that draws a lot of attention because it's a car crash. The reality is that oftentimes when they show up, it's 5 or 6 people with some handmade signs, and the people that show up to protest their protest actually vastly outnumber them. And it's almost comical, and it's because people continue to show up. Like I know Sam is a part of the Parasol Patrol, which is a fantastic counter movement to those types of hate groups. Continuing to show up and show that they are outnumbered says to them, we're not going to tolerate your noise.
Thank you, guys. We have several other questions, but unfortunately, we're almost out of time. If there are other questions from the audience, please type it in the chat, and we'll see if we can answer them in the next few minutes. But in the meantime, I would like to turn it over back to Cynthia to finish our presentation. Samantha, thank you for joining us. Nick, Sheena, it is always wonderful spending time with you. We appreciate you joining us on this call. This is such an important topic. Political violence not only targets politicians, but it targets advocates as well. And it's not just political violence, but it's the fear of being a target that can be very dangerous. So thank you again for your willingness to join us today. Cynthia?
Thank you, Sam. And I echo Sam's gratitude to Samantha, to Sheena, and to Nick. What I do want to leave you with is a quick reminder to help us stop House Bill 68. Quick reminder to contact House Speaker Jason Stevens. Phone number and email are right there, and contact your own House rep, urging them to reject House Bill 68 and to vote no on Wednesday if, in fact, this House session does pull up that measure to vote. We also want to remind you that House Bill 183 is going to have its sub-hearing on Wednesday at 9 a.m., listing both the House and Senate session. The Senate session is scheduled for Wednesday of January 24th, which is in a couple of weeks. We don't know if House Bill 68, that veto override, will be in that session or not. That will depend on how Wednesday goes in the House next week. Also want to remind folks about the State Board of Ed meeting, the monthly meeting on January 8th, and the bi-monthly meeting of due on January 18th. You can watch both of those, all of these, actually all 5 of these, on the Ohio channel live and recorded. And also, please, folks, join the Honesty mailing list. It's the fastest way to get all of this information straight into your inbox. Follow us on all 3 of our social media platforms, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Be sure to continue to register for these and other events. And please, when you get that information in your inbox or on social media, share it out. That's how we're going to create these concentric circles of information and knowledge, and reminding everyone why honest education is so important, and why we must all be on the front lines protecting our students, our families, and our own communities. We protect us. No one is coming to save us. We need to save ourselves, and not be victims of politics, but actually be participants of politics and good governance. So you can go ahead and pull up your phone, capture that QR code, and it should take you to our mailing list right away. And a quick housekeeping reminder that the slide deck, this gorgeous slide deck that Samantha Owens produced for us, will be uploaded to the Lunch and Learn page, as well as a recording of today's program. And then some, we love to give you a good link. This slide deck, everything that you see in yellow throughout the slide deck is a hyperlink. So when you head over to the Lunch and Learn landing page, download the slide deck, you can access all of this information. Oh, and there's another friendly reminder about House Bill 68. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we will see you back next month, first Friday, for our next Lunch and Learn program. Thank you. Love to everybody. Take care of yourselves this weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.